I want to give you some tips to get started with vibe coding. I think when you first get started that perhaps you shouldn't jump into either Cursor or Windsurf or Claude Code or Gemini Codex, whatever. I think that might not be the right place to start. However, there's a little bit of a caveat in there. If you are already a programmer, then you've got enough knowledge to just get started and jump straight in. I think if you're not a programmer, which I wasn't really, I've done coding over many years now, but I wouldn't really say I was a programmer. I was never particularly good at it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through something really quite simple, but I just want to give you some flavor for it. So we're going to go back a step from what I would maybe recommend now if you want to vibe code, and I'm going to look at just getting started with ChatGPT. I still use ChatGPT in my process, and I have a video about what my process is, and I even explain how I use ChatGPT inside my new process. However, when I first got started, I did everything inside ChatGPT. That's not particularly efficient. However, it made sense at the time, and I think it might even make sense for you if you just want to get started. So what I'm going to show you here is an app that I created inside ChatGPT. At least it started inside ChatGPT. It was a little bit rougher than what you can see on the screen now. What you see now is something that I've tidied up inside Cursor, and then eventually I moved to Windsurf. And so you're not seeing the original version, but you're seeing like a later polished up version. However, in theory, most of this you can do with ChatGPT, but it's much slower. So this app is my character creator app. I can generate a name, and this is all JavaScript. There is a tiny bit of HTML, a fair amount of CSS for the styling, and then a whole chunk of JavaScript, which is all of the logic of the application. So you can select a picture for this character, and this is characters that you'd be creating for Dungeons and Dragons or some sort of similar RPG. This could be for pen and paper games that you're doing at home with friends or perhaps online. And I wanted to create something simple like that, just as a way to teach myself things like to teach myself a bit about JavaScript and even to teach myself about React. I didn't really know that much about either JavaScript or React. I'd looked at them, but I had been sort of struggling to find proper time to learn, and I was kind of even struggling a little bit with interest. I'm not super fond of JavaScript, if I'm honest. It's very popular now, using it for a lot of things, because AI loves to work with JavaScript, so I'm happy enough to work with it with AI, but when I was trying to learn it myself, I was a little bit bored and I was finding it a little bit complex. Python, on the other hand, is much easier, and I prefer to work with Python myself. If I was to write code, I would have been more happy to write Python because it's just very simple and it's easy to read. However, here we are, it's JavaScript, we're using React, I was teaching myself, and this was a way to get started, to teach myself. I'm asking AI, help me to learn. So we've got this character creator app. You can, select a picture. You can, give it gender. You can give it a name. You can generate other random names. And here we have a template, so you can apply a template. So what do we want to do? Okay, let's make it a druid. That's a picture I've selected at the last minute there. Apply the template. So it's going to be a race of an elf, a class druid, level 1, an alignment, whatever. True neutral, whatever. Background. So this is the very first. This was the very first app that I ever created with AI. Albeit it was much simpler. And in the first version, what I did was I asked AI to populate this entire table, this entire page with stats and a name and everything else. However, I found that AI is not particularly good at creating sort of these random variables, random names and everything else. They are too much the same, so I do everything locally here instead. So everything is calculated locally inside JavaScript, and there's nothing to do with AI. I used AI basically to help me to create the code in the first place. So in the rest of this app, I show you in another video, this is actually now part of something that I call Dungeon GPT. Originally I just called it Character Creator, but I always had this idea that I would create this Dungeon GPT. So what you can do is you can then take this on to play a game inside this overall app. You can save your character here that you've just created, go to a new game, and then use AI as the dungeon master. So that shows you something that you can do. Another game that I want to show you is one called Fantasy Card Game. And if I just do this simple quick, and hopefully my little picture here is not covering too much of the app. I know that it will cover some, which is inevitable, but this is basically the second ever application that I ever made with vibe coding. So it should, and yes, I've polished it up later on with Cursor and then eventually with Windsurf, and I think that's a good path for you to follow too. Start with something simple, start inside ChatGPT, create something so you get started, create anything, and then later, once you're more confident and comfortable with working with AI, because there's all sorts of silly quirks with it, and you kind of have to start somewhere. This is the sort of thing that you can create. So inside here, we have the ability to select cards and they engage in combat. So maybe I select this last card, the Lich King. It's going to be using a magic fighting style, and then I can press the fight button, and you can see that he's taken some damage. He's fighting a necromancer who's taken some damage, and then there's a combat log. So it's a functioning game. There's a little bit of animation. There's some effects on the cards. This is, while it's not obviously going to be like AAA quality, it is reasonably well polished, and it shows you the sort of thing that you can create if you just want to do it, if you sit down and try to make it happen. And I want to use that, and or want to suggest this as a way to encourage you to do that. But let me show you where these projects started. I dug out the threads from ChatGPT. Now, the top left here saying ChatGPT 5.1 because that's the model that it defaults to now. However, when I started this project, it was either 3.5 or it was GPT-4. Something around it. I think when I signed up, I'm sure GPT-4 was out. However, this is the thread where I'm pretty sure I got started, and I didn't know much about React at all. It's here you can see that ChatGPT is responding, telling me how to create a new project, a new React project, and that's something I didn't know before. So it's telling me the commands, and so I could copy and paste this. Now I'm on Linux, possibly it's similar on Mac. Windows might be slightly different. You can always tell ChatGPT to give you something specific for your platform, but it can be done. So here I am. It's telling me what I need. It's telling me about dependencies. It's got a plan of what it wants to create. Now this is the character creator, so the first app that I just showed you. In the very first version, obviously it doesn't have all of the styling or anything. It's very, very raw. However, that's fine because you need a place to start. And ChatGPT would spit out the code that I needed to copy and paste. And there's even now a little funky copy code button, which I don't think was in the original version. It may have been, or it may have been sort of less obvious, but now it's much more obvious in the UI where it is. And this very first chunk of code is very small. There isn't really much to it. Obviously that's not the full app, right? That's just this top level part. So, not to dwell. Some things which are obviously very much React, where you can see like use state and all the rest of it. It's something that I kind of learned from using ChatGPT. I'm not an expert with it, but I did have some headaches doing this, and so I had to learn something about React when I'm going through this, and I'm going back and forth. And I'm copying and pasting the code from here into my IDE where I've created the files. And that is quite painfully slow and is prone to error. However, in that process, you will learn something. And again, if you're a non-programmer, I think that you will learn something, and you will learn something useful from that. If you are a programmer, then this is obviously pointless because you already know how to code a lot of this yourself. If you want to learn a new language, then maybe this is also a good way to learn a new language. Start with something that you don't know, and then just create something small. However, if I'm honest, I think if you are already quite an experienced programmer, you will probably almost certainly immediately jump to Claude Code, or you will jump to an IDE. I personally prefer IDEs. I have so many headaches with the various CLI tools like Claude Code, I'm not entirely happy with them. I do use them for certain things, perhaps if I'm trying to work on 2 projects at once, but in general, I'm not really the biggest fan for a variety of reasons. So you can see the code here. It almost doesn't really matter what it is. It's just the fact that it has been created, and this was ChatGPT. This was GPT-4, and we're now like at least we're 2 years into the future or something from when it launched. And in the old days, there's even problems that ChatGPT would cut its response short. It's like, oh, hey, look, you can see me here. Hey, you didn't finish your response. It's like, oh yeah, apologies for that. And this was one of the problems that we had to deal with. As you probably well remember yourself, whenever threads just wouldn't finish properly. And you can see maybe on the right, there's this tiny little cursor, not the cursor, the scroll bar, because I've been in this thread for a long time as I'm copying back and forth. And then I'd have like errors and all sorts of things that I eventually had to figure out. So it was very much a useful learning process. How much of this do I really remember? Well, I don't really remember the syntax particularly well for JavaScript, and I'm never going to be writing great syntax. I really don't really need to at this stage. I think AI can replace me in that regard in writing good JavaScript code. Now, yes, there's going to be a ton of caveats I can add there, and people who are super experienced will say, oh, the code that comes out is terrible, so on and so forth. Like kind of like whatever. I don't care. I'm creating working apps which are good for me. I'm not putting these into production. If you wanted to put it into production, then there's another conversation to be had there about how you might want to try to find the errors and bugs in the code or the insecure patterns, and then how to fix that. But that again is another discussion and probably another video. So I think you can get an impression now of how it is as I just scroll through this. As you can see, I'm having some back and forth trying to figure things out as I'm asking questions like, no, should I use a database, so on and so forth. Eventually I did use a database. I don't quite remember what I used in the end. I think it might have just been SQLite that I used for this, and then that is to save the characters and to save the game for Dungeon GPT. I'll show you my other thread with ChatGPT where I've got started, and this is for the fantasy card game. So that's the one that you saw second with all the different stats, and you can see early on in the very first response, it's telling me what it thinks the structure should be for the cards, the data structure. So i.e. a dragon, and then an image, which is a path to the image, and then its stats, and so on and so forth. It mentioned different components that you should create, which is the different files that you should create. And inside places like Cursor and Windsurf, all of this will be done for you automatically. You don't need to copy and paste. You don't need to create the files by hand. But when you're just getting started out, it's actually a reasonable way to get started. It is reasonable to understand where AI is good with coding, or where it's better and where it's worse, and you'll get a real feel for that inside ChatGPT. Also with ChatGPT is you don't have to pay another subscription to Cursor or Windsurf in order to get started. You can just start writing code here and then start playing around and testing. So there's no extra cost, and a lot of people already have a ChatGPT subscription. Additionally to that, you can also use Codex. Codex is a command line tool, and again, I'm not desperately happy with it. However, since you're already using ChatGPT, which I'm assuming that you might be, which is very possible, you get Codex usage for free inside your subscription. There are limits, but you can get started and use the CLI tool already with the subscription that you have. And I think that's a real big benefit of using something like that. If you've got a subscription with Anthropic or with Google, then you can also use their associated CLI tools, and they're all basically kind of the same. I think Claude is probably the best. Codex is decent. Gemini I'm not desperately fond of. The Gemini models aren't quite as good. maybe Gemini 3 will be amazing, but at the moment 2.5 is merely okay. It can help, but it's not really quite enough. So yeah, just really, it's giving you, ChatGPT will give you the JavaScript, it'll give you the HTML, it'll give you the CSS, and you have to copy and paste it into the right files. And as I said, that is very error prone. So it's not what you want to be doing longer term, but it is a way to get started. And you'll have something which looks a bit rough, but you can make it work, and it'll give you the appetite. If you are not really enjoying working on coding in this way, like vibe coding, as you want to call it that, or AI assisted coding, if you're already struggling at this point, there's a chance that maybe you're just not going to enjoy it. Now, that is maybe not entirely true, because when you use something like Cursor or Windsurf, it's even easier again. I'll quickly bring up Windsurf because I've already got it open. I've got Dungeon GPT already open. I'm looking at the README because I was trying to remind myself of the commands. Cursor or Windsurf here, sorry, in this case they're both almost the same. It will show you on the left hand side all of your files, and in the middle it will show you the files that you've opened up that you want to read and that you want to edit. So you can make all of, you can edit the code here by yourself, by hand, if you want to. Or of course on the right hand side you've got this little AI chat box where you can ask to, AI to help you with the code, and it will make the changes for you. It can do those automatically, and then you can accept or reject those changes inside the files. So the files that you've got open in the middle, it will show you with either green highlighting, essentially, the code that's added, or red highlighting the text, the code that it wants to take away, and you can then just accept or reject. So you don't have to copy and paste yourself, and that's one of the biggest increases in productivity that you can have with vibe coding, or AI assisted coding, we should say. You're not really just going with vibes anymore. You should be trying to direct AI to go the direction that you want, and not in some random direction, nor to wander off. You want to really keep it quite directed. And productivity will increase massively. Things will go so much faster. There'll be less mistakes. And I think to that extent, it will be more enjoyable. But it's worth just having this sort of simpler, more naive, rougher starting point in order to get a bit of a feeling of where AI is good and bad. AI will make mistakes, and AI will give you something which might look kind of right but isn't quite right. And you have to work with it. You have to ask it for a second time or a third time in order to get it fixed. And some people might complain that, oh, why can't I do it perfectly first time around? Well, it's just not how it works. Here we are in 2025, and that's just not how it works. However, you can still have some fantastic results, as I think that I can show with these two simple games that I've made, the card game and the Dungeon GPT. They're working. They're reasonably well polished. They might not be the absolute best, but they're decent. And so it's something that you can do. So it's not that it's complete and utter garbage. They both work. And I think that in itself is good. And I think it's something that can motivate you to also to try this out. So this was a little bit of a story about how I got started, and I hope that it's useful, and I hope that it will encourage you to also get started to try something. Make mistakes, start simple, come up with an idea, and then just keep iterating. Because obviously what I have now with my apps, in the very, very first version of them, they weren't nearly as polished as they are now. And it's also worth remembering that AI is now even more powerful than it was when I was starting with coding in GPT-4. So all of the UI stuff you can ask to get made for you almost from the very start. You won't learn as much, certainly, but you can do it, and it's like you can create something which looks great without even much effort. And I think that's one of the sort of real jumps that we've seen in performance with AI in the last sort of two years. That's pretty much everything that I wanted to say. It was just a fairly short video, probably end up racking up about 20 minutes or so. But I hope it's something of an encouragement and will kind of direct you in a way that you can get started and then make your own progress. Great. So if you can like and subscribe, it will always help my channel with the algorithm. And yeah, I'll hopefully see you in another video. Thanks for watching.